Beryl might be the greatest swordsman alive, but he doesn't realize it. Now in his 40s, he runs a small, quiet dojo out in the countryside, far from any real excitement. One morning, while he's going through his daily training drills in the yard, his father watches him with a heavy sigh and says he wishes there were some grandchildren around to keep him company. It's been years since Beryl took over the family dojo, but when it comes to romance, nothing has really changed. He's just as single as ever. Beryl replies that he's been too busy managing the dojo to worry about things like starting a family, but his father refuses to drop the subject. Half-jokingly, he even suggests Beryl should train a promising young female student and eventually marry her, but Beryl immediately shuts that idea down, pointing out how completely inappropriate that would be. The dojo has been passed down through their family for generations, and Beryl has dedicated himself fully to it since he inherited it. There was a time when he dreamed of gaining fame and respect as a swordmaster. Though his skills far outshine those of an ordinary swordsman, he's never thought of himself as deserving of such a grand title. Still, he takes pride in his role as a teacher, having trained many students who went on to achieve impressive things. Later that evening, after wrapping up the day's practice, Beryl sits down for dinner with his parents, but his father brings up the marriage talk again. Family, grandchildren, the whole works. He even tries to get Beryl's mother to back him up, though she takes a softer approach. She says these things can't be forced, but still hints that she hopes to see a grandchild someday. Beryl nearly chokes on his food at that. It's easy for them to say, but the reality is different. He doesn't even have a girlfriend, let alone any plans for a family. It's not like some beautiful woman is just going to show up at their doorstep. Except, right at that moment, there's a knock at the door. When Beryl answers it, he's stunned to see a strikingly beautiful woman standing there. She greets him politely, calling him master. Once he gets a closer look, he realizes it's Aludia Citrus, one of his former students. He invites her inside and offers her some tea while they catch up. Beryl remembers her well. She had been a gifted and hardworking student. What surprises him, though, is hearing that she's risen all the way to become the commander of the Royal Knight Order. Wondering why she's come all this way, Beryl asks her about her visit. Alutia explains that, as Knight Commander, one of her responsibilities is to oversee the training of new recruits. After giving it some thought, she decided to personally recommend Beryl to become a special sword instructor, and to his shock, the Imperial Court approved her recommendation, making it an official command. That's why she's here, delivering the news in person. Beryl never really wanted to become an Imperial instructor, so his first instinct is to refuse the offer. But before he can even open his mouth, his father cuts in, warning him that rejecting an Imperial command isn't just rude, it could actually cost him his life. It's not something he can simply dismiss. Alutia quickly steps in, reassuring Beryl that no one's going to execute him for turning it down, but there would definitely be serious consequences. So, she says, it's probably safer if he just accepts. She then casually mentions that a carriage is already waiting to take them to the capital, and she'll explain the details of his new position the following day. Beryl is shocked that Alutia expects him to leave immediately, but his father doesn't seem bothered at all. In fact, he waves him off cheerfully, telling him to enjoy himself in the capital, and maybe even find a wife while he's there. He even jokes loudly that Alutia wouldn't be a bad choice. Mortified, Beryl tells his father to knock it off, especially since it's clearly making Alutia uncomfortable. He also points out that there's a big age gap between them. Still, Alutia shyly mutters that she wouldn't really mind. Not wanting to risk whatever serious consequences might come with refusing, Beryl agrees to go. While riding in the carriage with Alutia, Beryl notices something that catches him off guard. She's still carrying the sword he gave her, the very same blade he awards every student who graduates from his dojo. It's a symbol of completion, and she's kept hers in perfect condition all these years. He feels genuinely moved that she still values it so highly, although he thinks it's not nearly good enough for someone of her level. She could easily afford a better weapon from a skilled blacksmith, but Alutia insists she's perfectly happy with it. Beryl figures she's just being sentimental, that she still sees anything from her old teacher as more special than it really is. After all, in Beryl's mind, he's just an ordinary swordsman. He doesn't believe he's qualified to take on such an important role at the Imperial Academy. At that moment, Alutia grins and teases him, saying she's excited for the country bumpkin swordmaster to make his big debut in the capital. Beryl shoots her a puzzled look, wondering who on earth she's talking about. He's no bumpkin, and definitely not a swordmaster, at least in his own eyes. But Alutia insists otherwise. Whether he believes it or not, he's already famous among those who know swords. Many of his former students have gone on to become celebrated warriors and adventurers. In the right circles, Beryl is practically a legend, though Alutia admits she's not a huge fan of the nickname he's earned over the years. Beryl laughs at the story, but doesn't really believe it. As far as he's concerned, Alucia is probably the only person left who still thinks of him as anything special. Before long, they reached the royal capital. Alucia dropped Beryl off at a quiet little inn, telling him to get some rest and promising she'd come back for him in the morning. True to her word, she showed up the next day and brought him to the royal castle, where she formally introduced him to the Knight Order. Standing before the gathered recruits, Alucia proudly declared that Beryl was so talented that even she wouldn't stand a chance against him, and that they should consider themselves fortunate to be trained by someone of his level. However, not everyone seemed convinced. A few knights exchanged skeptical looks, and one in particular didn't bother to hide his disapproval. Clearly, some doubted whether Beryl really deserved the position. Later, as Beryl and Alucia strolled through the castle halls, she congratulated him on becoming an official special instructor. She explained that the role wouldn't be too demanding. He would only need to train the recruits 3 or 4 times a month. That way, he could still manage the dojo back in his village without much disruption. Suddenly, a young woman came running toward them, practically bursting with excitement. She had been waiting for this moment. Her name was Kiruni, a former student of Beryl's from a couple of years ago. Beryl remembered her well. Her dream had always been to join the Knight Order, and seeing her achieve it filled him with pride. Although she was still a trainee and had a long road ahead before becoming a full-fledged knight, she was thrilled to be able to train under Beryl once more. Alucia seemed just as happy about it too. Later that same day, Beryl returned home, expecting a quiet night, but the moment he stepped inside, he found a familiar face waiting for him, another old friend. It was Randrid, and he hadn't come alone. He had brought his wife and their newborn baby to introduce them. Beryl was overjoyed to see Randrid doing so well, but before he could say much, his father, as blunt as ever, cut in, telling Beryl not to come back until he had a wife and child of his own. Randrid had gone on to become a platinum-ranked adventurer after graduating from Beryl's dojo, an impressive achievement. But now that he had a family, he had decided to retire and return to the village. Beryl was surprised that Randrid would walk away from such a high-ranking adventurer status so easily, but he understood. The dangerous life of an adventurer wasn't ideal for someone with a family to protect. As they caught up, Randrid casually mentioned that he planned to help out by running the dojo. Beryl, confused, asked what he meant, and that's when his father dropped the real news. He had already decided that Randrid would take over the dojo, meaning Beryl no longer needed to stay. In short, his father had kicked him out, even though technically, Beryl was the owner of the dojo now. The next day, Beryl explains everything to Alucia, telling her that he'll need to find a place to live in the city. The inn he stayed at the previous night was way too upscale to be a permanent solution, so he's hoping to find somewhere a bit more affordable. Alucia is happy to offer her help with the search. Half-jokingly, she even suggests that Beryl could just stay at her house, but Beryl quickly refuses, saying it wouldn't be appropriate. Alucia's disappointment is obvious, but she doesn't argue. Instead, trying to lighten the mood, she asks if he'd at least like to grab lunch together. Beryl agrees, and they start heading toward a nearby restaurant. However, before they get far, a voice suddenly calls out, criticizing Alucia for walking around in public with a man and speaking to him so casually, even calling him master without formality. It's clear this girl has some kind of bad blood with Alucia. She looks outraged that the Knight Commander would be seen in such an undignified situation with someone who, to her, looks like just a random man. Beryl tries to stay under the radar, keeping his head down to avoid causing a scene, but the girl doesn't let up. She storms up to him and yanks his mask down, demanding to see his face. The moment she does, her whole demeanor changes. She immediately addresses him as Master, leaving Beryl completely confused. He doesn't recognize her at all until she reminds him her name is Serena, and he once saved her life and taught her the basics of sword fighting. It takes a moment, but then the memories start coming back. Beryl remembers a badly wounded girl he had rescued about 20 years ago. He had nursed her back to health and given her some training before they eventually parted ways. He hadn't seen her since. Beryl, now officially part of the Black Rank, is genuinely surprised to find out Serena has also become a Black Rank adventurer. Serena apologizes for not visiting him all these years, but also asks what has brought him to the capital so suddenly. Alucia steps in to explain that Beryl has been appointed as a special instructor for the Knight Order, and that she's been helping him find a place to live. However, Serena immediately cuts in, insisting that she'd be far better suited for the task. After all, she spent years staying in different inns and knows the best spots. Before long, Alucia and Serena are bickering back and forth, each arguing that They should be the one helping Beryl find his new home. Stuck awkwardly between the two, Beryl has no idea why there's so much tension between them. Still, with their combined and often chaotic efforts, they eventually manage to find him a decent inn that fits his needs. Once everything is settled, Beryl thanks both women for their help. Then, with an exhausted sigh, he pleads with them to stop arguing, for the sake of his own sanity, because he's had more than enough shouting for one day. Out of respect for him, both women finally fall silent, and the three of them head back together without any more drama. The two women walked away in silence. The city's hustle and bustle might not be his ideal environment, and he's not exactly fond of all the noise and chaos that come with it. However, knowing that many of his former students are nearby brings him a quiet sense of comfort. Perhaps, just perhaps, he won't feel so out of place here after all. The following day, the usual training session for the Night Order is taking place. On the field, Vice Commander Henblitz is showing off his skills, easily outclassing every sparring partner with his sharp, precise swordsmanship, making it clear that he's on a whole different level. After finishing his bout, Alutia steps forward and makes an announcement. She informs everyone that there will be a change in plans. Beryl will now be training them more frequently, not just once a week. Starting that day, he will be part of their training sessions, and she expects everyone to push themselves harder than ever. Beryl then steps up to introduce himself, expressing his excitement about working with them. However, before he can even start his first session, Henblitz approaches him directly with something to address. Henblitz explains that to be appointed as a special instructor for the Night Order, one must prove a certain level of strength. So, as part of the protocol, and with no disrespect, he's officially challenging Beryl to a duel. It's nothing personal. Henblitz just wants to confirm that Beryl is truly qualified for the role. As Vice Commander, Henblitz has the authority to issue such a challenge, and Alutia unsurprisingly approves without hesitation. Beryl sighs quietly, wishing she would stop signing him up for things without consulting him first. But Henblitz has issued the challenge, and now he has no choice but to accept. Henblitz believes that the only reason Beryl is here is because Alutia still holds admiration for her former mentor. But just because he was her instructor doesn't automatically mean he's suited for the role. Henblitz intends to prove that by defeating him in front of everyone. Oddly enough, Beryl agrees with most of Henblitz's points. He's never thought of himself as worthy of the title of special instructor. However, if he loses here, it will reflect poorly on Alutia, who stuck her neck out for him. For her sake, he decides to give the fight his all. The duel begins, with Henblitz charging forward in a flash of speed, closing the distance between them almost instantly. Beryl raises his sword, calmly deflecting the onslaught of strikes aimed at him. He's genuinely impressed by Henblitz's speed and the brutal power behind each blow, but Beryl knows that if he times it just right, if he can deflect one strike at the perfect angle, he can create an opening, and that's exactly what happens. With a precise deflection, he catches Henblitz off guard and lands a blow to his head. As Henblitz off guard and closes the distance, his blade poised for a finishing blow. Henblitz freezes, knowing that if this were a real fight, he'd be dead. That earns Beryl a point. The two reset their stances, and this time, Henblitz charges in even faster. Beryl is still impressed by Henblitz's raw strength, but his movements are predictable, and Beryl easily deflects each attack with practiced precision. Realizing that Beryl won't be defeated so easily, Henblitz decides to stop holding back. He unleashes his signature move, the Roaring Blade, a high-speed spinning attack so powerful it can't be blocked or parried by normal means. It's a move meant to end a fight in one blow, but just as the blade swings toward him, Beryl vanishes. In an instant, he reappears behind Henblitz, his sword resting calmly at the man's neck, signaling the end of the fight. Henblitz doesn't seem angry, though. He's stunned, yes, but more in awe than anything else. With a nod, he admits defeat with humility and apologizes for doubting Beryl's abilities earlier. Later, Henblitz organizes a small party to officially welcome Beryl as the new night instructor. But even during the celebration, he can't shake the question that's been nagging at him. How did Beryl counter his spinning move? Beryl, as always, downplays it, explaining that he simply moved with Henblitz's rotation, using it to slip behind him. It sounds easy enough, but Beryl admits it takes a lot of timing, instinct, and experience to pull off. Henblitz laughs, amazed at how casually Beryl describes something so impressive. Regardless, he's genuinely excited to train under him, and the rest of the recruits share his enthusiasm. A week has passed since Beryl started his role as an instructor, and as two knights spar on the training grounds, Beryl walks over to offer a quick tip. He's been observing their technique for a while, and while their swordplay is solid, he points out that their spacing needs work. He demonstrates how focusing too much on an opponent's blade can leave them vulnerable to a surprise attack before they realize the gap has closed. It might seem like a small thing, but in a real duel, even half a step can be the difference between life and death. Beryl thought it was just a simple tip, but the way everyone is looking at him, you'd think he'd just revealed some ancient secret of swordsmanship. Since his duel with Hemblitz, the knights have been hanging on his every word like it's gospel. Beryl doesn't mind though. It's definitely made his training sessions run a lot smoother. After the session ends, Beryl takes a seat to relax, and Hemblitz walks over to hand him a towel to dry off. A little while later, Kirini approaches and asks if Beryl has any plans for the rest of the day. He hadn't really planned on doing much, and that's all she needs to know. Before she even asks, Karuti senses it's the right moment. She turns to Beryl and wonders if he'd like a brief tour around the city. He pauses, thinking it over, and realizes he's hardly seen any of Baltrain since arriving, so he agrees. Karuti lights up with joy and rushes off to throw on something more casual. Elsewhere in the capital, Alutia is buried in a stack of meetings with royal dignitaries, updating them on the Night Order's progress, especially regarding their newly appointed special instructor. She confidently tells them that Beryl has already exceeded expectations. With everything settled, the meeting comes to an end. She remembers what people told her before she accepted the position. If you want to keep sharpening your swordsmanship, don't become a mech captain. The red tape alone will wear you down. But Alutia hadn't taken the job for herself. She did it because it was the only way to bring Beryl to the capital. Years ago, when Alutia was just a child, her parents enrolled her in Beryl's dojo for basic self-defense. From the moment she met him, she knew this was someone honorable. Once she began training, Beryl had her drilling sword forms, hopping between tree stumps to build her footwork, and doing simple routines to strengthen her core. His style wasn't exactly traditional, but in time, wielding a sword became second nature under his mentorship. One day, Beryl asked if she'd like to spar. She leapt at the chance, eager to prove how far she'd come. But as soon as the match began, she realized she couldn't find a single flaw in his stance. Not one opening. She'd grown up thinking all sword instructors were like him, formidable, disciplined. But that illusion cracked during a trip with the dojo to a friendly mock battle against another school. Her opponent in that match was a mess, rushing forward with zero control, swinging wildly with no sense of timing. Alutia dismantled him in seconds. Later, as their group made their way back, Beryl seemed pleased that his students got to challenge themselves against unfamiliar styles. Along the path, Alutia asked if their dojo was simply better. After all, they'd won every duel, and even Beryl had defeated the other master. But Beryl didn't like thinking in terms of winners or losers. Sure, they were victorious, but what mattered most was what they took away from the experience. Alutia understood. But then she realized something. Her hairpin was gone. It was precious to her, and she must have dropped it at the rival dojo. She told Beryl she'd return to look for it. When she got back and started searching the grounds, she spotted the same boy she'd fought earlier. He had her hairpin in hand. For a moment, it looked like he was about to simply hand it over and pretend. Of course, things couldn't be that simple. Instead of handing it over, he tossed the hairpin into the dojo behind him and smugly told Alutia she'd have to fight everyone inside if she wanted it back. He'd lost earlier, sure, but with backup, he figured the odds were now in his favor. Judging by how poor their swordplay had been before, Alutia probably could have handled them all with ease, but she remembered Beryl's teachings. He wouldn't want her using her skills to lash out over pride, so instead of retaliating, she held her ground, bracing herself for the incoming blow. Just before the strike landed, Beryl stepped in, taking the hit in her place. It didn't hurt him much, but he winced slightly. Calmly, he looked the boys in the eye and asked if this was really the kind of swordsman they aspired to be. Still not grasping the gravity of what he was doing, the ringleader tried to smack Beryl on the head this time. Beryl smoothly dodged, and with a single fluid motion, disarmed him. In the blink of an eye, he was already fending off strikes from the others, parrying their attacks with precise, measured skill. Before the scene could escalate further, the dojo master appeared, having rushed over after hearing the noise. His face was full of regret and disappointment. Kneeling with a solemn expression, he offered Beryl a heartfelt apology, promising that something like this would never happen again under his roof. As they walked back home, Beryl and Alutia walked side by side. He told her that he'd had a bad feeling when she went back for her hairpin, so he followed, just in case. It wasn't anything serious, he reassured her. She hadn't done anything wrong and shouldn't blame herself. If anything, he blamed himself for letting one of his students face a risky situation without being there. Years went by. Now, Alucia stood sparring with Beryl once more. His technique remained as sharp as ever. But this time, she managed to keep pace, and finally, she landed a clean hit on him. Beryl smiled, genuinely impressed with how far she'd come. He told her she was ready. It was time to graduate from the dojo. With quiet pride, he presented her with her ceremonial sword. By then, Alucia had come to realize something. Beryl had no idea just how incredibly skilled he truly was. She didn't want to leave. There was still so much more she could learn from him. But she didn't want to make things harder for him by refusing. So instead of arguing, she made herself a promise. She would prove to the world that Beryl's teachings were second to none. That's why she took the Night Order's entrance exam. And just as she expected, Beryl had prepared her perfectly.